Um, I want to start by talking about what we're doing at the Kelley School in Africa, and then how I fit into that. And then we'll talk about different approaches to doing business in Africa. Most of my stories, as you'll find out, are going to focus on my experiences in South Africa, and we'll work through those. So at the Kelley School, we are doing service learning or micro consulting projects on the continent. We have students who are going to South Africa and to Ghana for internships, and we have a student organization, which I'm sure some of you have at your schools, called Alternative Break Program, where the students themselves pick a social issue, they find a partner in the region that they are targeting, and they develop an alternative to spring break or winter break or that week after finals in May, and they go and do either hands-based or minds-based volunteerism. And so our students have been going to Ghana to study women's empowerment for some time. We've also developed partnerships with major universities, particularly in South Africa, but around the continent, to help us with these teaching endeavors. We have engagement with, for example, mining companies. We've worked with banking, Nedbank, one of the largest banks in South Africa. We've worked with consulting firms, both traditional consulting firms, but in particular, human rights consulting firms. Lots of work with healthcare across the continent, as well as media. We've developed relationships with journalists and editors in order to get their view of what's happening on the ground in their countries, and with law. So law in a couple of different ways. I see I have a message in the chat, so I'm just going to disregard that and not be distracted by it. But with law, with human rights attorneys and what they are doing around the human rights issues that arise when businesses come into the environment in Africa, as well as homegrown businesses, of course, and also doing things like helping low-income people get title to their homes. So think about South Africa. The South African government during the apartheid era built townships, these horrible places. They built housing within those townships. And some families have lived in those homes for literally generations, but they don't own them. And so lawyers are going in and they're helping these folks get title so that they have an asset so that they can begin to build wealth. And finally, we have faculty consulting and research going on across the continent, both in the MENA or Middle East and North Africa region and throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And it's hard not to think of those areas as distinct. As Raj mentioned, I've been fortunate to be part of the IU delegation to the UN Conference of Parties on Climate Change for the last 3 years. I've attended for 6, obviously nothing in 2020, but as a delegate and with observer status. And last year was an African COP because it was held in Egypt, which most people don't think of so much as Africa, but Egyptians certainly do. And but ironically, it was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is on the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, so quite literally on the Asian continent. In any event, where I come in is I have taught a course on business and human rights in South Africa since 2017. The course has traditionally gone to Johannesburg, which is the business capital. We couldn't go in 2020, of course. As you can imagine, that was a pretty heartbreaking semester for us. The course itself meets for 8 weeks on campus. So we start in early March, and then we travel for 2 weeks after finals week. So the first day of class is the first Monday in March, and everyone's excited to go to South Africa. I had been paying attention to news about COVID, but while we were nervous, the students hadn't been paying much attention. So we had great excitement. We go in on Wednesday, and there's talk that the school is going to take an extended spring break. The following day, the school announced that it was going to have an extended spring break to look at what was developing with COVID. And obviously, we didn't travel that year. And we didn't travel in 2021 either. It seems like a million years ago, doesn't it? But most of people my age weren't even vaccinated until late spring, and certainly our students weren't. In 2022, I retooled the class to go study human rights issues in Northern Ireland with its history of sectarian violence. And we went to Dublin and Belfast, and we went back in 2023 to sort of keep those relationships going. And I learned an important lesson, which is it's really great to have fun when you do these trips. I love Johannesburg, I love the people, but it is a city with a lot of crime problems. And so we're very locked down in our hotel when we are not out doing business visits. So this year we're going back to South Africa, but we're going to go to Cape Town. I also teach a class on business and poverty alleviation that challenges students to conduct interviews with experts in the regions that they are targeting to think about what are the causes of poverty and what are business solutions to poverty. And as a result, my students have talked to people in Myanmar, all across the African continent, East Asia, in India. They've talked with smallholder farmers. They've talked with university professors all across the globe. And it's really amazing what they've accomplished with that sort of work. I am an attorney. I started in private practice and spent 10 years there doing corporate litigation, healthcare law, appellate law, and administrative law. I was then recruited to IU Health, which is our largest healthcare system, and spent 3 years there. And then as a capstone on my practice, I was with the ACLU of Indiana. And during those last 5 years that I was in practice, I actually started teaching at the IU McKinney School of Law. We have 2 law schools. My alma mater. And then I also taught at Butler University, which is a small liberal arts college in Indianapolis, better known for its basketball program, I think, than anything. I actually got this teaching gig because a friend of mine said, Kelley, I've been asked to teach business ethics in the business school. It was the first time I knew that lawyers taught in business schools. And she said, I'm afraid to do it because I might have basketball players in my classes, and that would be a conflict of interest, because her husband was the Butler basketball coach. And so for those of you who follow sports, Tracy Stevens is my friend and a fellow attorney, and her husband, Brad Stevens, took Butler to the NCAA final game 2 years in a row. He's now GM with the Celtics. And I'll close with this. I talked about the first 2 classes. I also teach 2 courses on climate law and policy, a course on sustainability law, and a course on business law and ethics, just a pretty traditional legal environment of business class. But I always say I teach the cool stuff in the Kelley School. So let's talk about Africa and see how all those things interrelate. I don't have to tell you that that Africa is huge. And as obvious as it might sound, it's not a connected economy. It's really a myriad of truly isolated countries, both from an economic and a geographic point of view, although there's some good news in this area around doing business there. But, as a friend said, try to get from Freetown in Sierra Leone to Monrovia in the rainy season. Check out flight times from Harare to Lagos. It is not an easy continent to navigate. There's a lot of languages. Almost every country has its own currency. There is some move among Central African states, West African states to go to one currency, but it hasn't happened. So each country really requires an independent approach and effort, and companies need to consider carefully whether to enter a country. And that is beyond my brief and beyond the scope of our time together. But there are some criteria that you can think about. Abundance of natural resources. And that can be a blessing and a curse when it comes to the climate perspective, which I'll focus on more at the end. But for example, in Nigeria, Mozambique, Angola, they have abundant oil and gas, and that's really critical for energy production, construction, and industrial goods. Population size, a growing middle class, the literacy rates, the degree of literacy. Countries like Kenya and Ghana have great university systems and high rates of literacy. These may be good places to go if you're a consumer goods company. African countries, some of them have done an awful lot in the last decade to improve their regulatory structure. So they've improved rule of law. So looking to see, if I go there, are there attorneys that I can work with? Will there be mediation processes if we have a contractual dispute? Are the courts reliable? Can we go into court and believe that we'll be treated fairly and be able to work through those concerns within the legal system? I say here, invest patient capital, and this is just true anytime you're doing business in a poorer region at the base of the pyramid, as we might refer to it, but also in countries that have infrastructure challenges. You have to be prepared to go in and stay longer, and just be very patient in the way that you develop your business. It's just a different sort of marketplace. I have develop and leverage local relationships and develop local talent, and I really do think of those as two different things. So one, you might want to directly acquire some established local entrepreneurships that suit the needs of your business. But from a business and human rights perspective, I'd encourage you to manage up, right? Go in, develop relationships with local talent, develop that talent, send them to headquarters in Dallas for the training that you do with your middle managers, in Houston. Help them develop good business skills. It's important to have African faces at the forefront of your business, and not just as a false front, but as people who are really managing the company. It helps to develop trust. Relatedly, auxiliary services, things that we take for granted in many countries, are often missing in Africa. So power, water, transportation, supplies. You may find that your company needs to develop its own small power generating station. You may need to put up solar panels. You may need to create a sewage system. Coca-Cola imports fuel in some of its locations for its bottling facilities. You may find that professional services companies like marketing and accounting are not up to the standards to which you are accustomed. Nevertheless, you can see that this extended perimeter, if you are patient and you take the time to develop it, can really end up being a good barrier to entry for your competitors. And this is another thing about going into these marketplaces, is if you can go in with your business and occupy the space with your business, you may be the sole provider of the goods or services for some period of time without competition. And again, by developing these auxiliary services, by developing this talent, you can really corner your market. And I say here last, face corruption and be really public about it. So this is a tactic that GE has taken all across the world, IKEA as well. Going in, frankly, to IKEA has a story. They went into Russia. They have a policy of not paying bribes, and there's a bribery culture in Russia. And as a result, they couldn't get the electricity turned on for their store. So they relied on other forms of power. They had to generate their own power to open the doors. And eventually they were able to work through some of those roadblocks. GE has been very public in talking about corruption when it has impacted their businesses. But we should also bear in mind that sometimes what looks like corruption, like nepotism, is also cultural. So whereas we would think it improper if I hired my relatives to come work in my business, in some cultures, it may be considered unethical if you don't hire your family members. So there is some issues in navigating around that. And here's some really good news about connecting the continent, which is the free trade area. So it's an overarching positive development for the continent. It creates the largest free trade area in the world, measured by the number of countries participating It's connecting 1.3 billion people across 54 countries. I believe Eritrea is the only African country that is not signatory to the free trade area. And their combined gross domestic product, so a snapshot view of all the goods and services in the marketplace at any given time, is 3.4 trillion US. So this is huge. And the goal is to create a single continent-wide market for goods and services and for business and investment. They also want to reduce tariffs or taxes among member countries. Think about the challenges of getting goods and services from some of the Central African countries, which are landlocked and therefore have to cross multiple borders to get to a port, to get to a river city, to get to a port, to export goods if they want to export in any sort of a global way. Tariffs upon tariffs upon tariffs. So they're trying to reduce these tariffs. They're also trying to cover policy areas like trade facilitation and also regulatory measures. So to improve this, like sanitary standards. So why would this make a difference? Well, in Northern Ireland, right? Northern Ireland's part of the UK. It's on the same island as the Republic of Ireland. Since the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, there's been a very soft border between the two countries, or the Republic and driving into Northern Ireland. You don't notice it as you make that crossing. But with Brexit, Northern Ireland left the EU. The Republic of Ireland is in the EU, and they have different standards about stuff like chilled meat. And the chilled meat problem was such that it almost derailed the Northern Ireland Protocol, which established a border to check goods coming from Britain into Northern Ireland. And it looked like they would not be able to get their sausages because of the risk that those different sanitary standards between the UK and Republic of Ireland would end up crossing that EU border. So, I mean, the strangest stuff can often be the thing that causes the most political discord. And so improved sanitary standards, improved, reducing technical barriers to trade. All of these are goals of the Free Trade Area Agreement. Cooperation on investments, but also intellectual property. So if it's a business that is based on ideas, on design, you want to be very sure that if you are taking your product in to be manufactured on the continent, that your intellectual property will not be stolen. This has been a huge concern for companies doing business in China. And so strengthening those IP laws, connecting that again with the necessity for rule of law, and establishing mechanisms for the settlement of disputes. So the World Trade Organization has a robust dispute settlement process, and the Free Trade Area for the African continent wants to develop similarly a good system of dispute resolution between the parties, the different countries to the agreement. You can see here on the slide the other hopes for economic boosts, for increasing exports, mostly from manufacturing. I'll talk about supply chain in a minute and the opportunities, boosting wages for women, boosting wages for unskilled workers. And then this last point, it has the potential to lift people out of moderate poverty, which is about $3 US a day, and extreme poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day in relative dollars. And I want to use that as a jumping off point to talk about opportunities. I think that picture's so cool. So an opportunity and an opportunity for business, a challenge for African countries is that the population is growing. It's growing for reasons that are positive. It's growing because of improved vaccine regimens, improved healthcare, life expectancy has increased. And so it's a positive sign, but obviously it puts pressures on fragile economies. And that growing population is urbanizing. And urbanization can lead to degradation of rural communities. It can lead to the development of slums, and some of the slums in major African cities are places of great despair. But from a business perspective, we can see that incomes are rising across most of the continent. This is generating a lot of business opportunities, particularly in the consumer market. We know in the United States how important consumer spending is to our economy. It's about 70%. The Brookings Institution, nonpartisan, expects annual spending by African consumers and businesses to reach 6.6 trillion by the end of this decade. And that's up from 4 trillion in 2015. Now, those numbers are 2019 numbers. So we should be slightly suspect of them because of the impacts of COVID. But there is an upward trend, a positive trend, and especially in areas where Africans have unmet needs. So think about food, beverages, drinking water, pharmaceuticals, financial services, healthcare, and education. So increased wages, lifting people out of moderate poverty, hopefully lifting people out of extreme poverty. I have to show the pyramids that show us the base of the pyramid. This comes from the work of Professor C.K. Prahalad and his colleague Stuart Hart, both from University of Michigan. And I'd note that their great critic was Professor Anil Karnani. I think my department meetings can be a little fraught. I can't imagine what it's like to be in the office next door to your greatest critic, but they produce some fascinating scholarship on what Prahalad has called the fortune at the base of the pyramid. And you can see just on this chart, I couldn't find anything more updated, and I apologize to you for that there has been a growth in the wealth at the base of the pyramid. These are the poorest 4 to 5 billion people on Earth. And while people in extreme poverty don't really have much income to spend, their subsistence living, people who are in moderate poverty, they're poor, but they have money. Poor people have money, and poor people consume, and poor people buy goods. And so the trick is to access this market. If you sell Lamborghinis, you have a pretty small group of people who are going to buy them, right? The top 1%. So you have to have a really high profit margin. You're not going to make any money because you're not selling 100 Lamborghinis a day. But if you're selling a consumer good product, if you're selling laundry soap, if you're selling ibuprofen, if you're selling other types of goods and services, if you can price point that with a low profit margin, you can still make quite a bit of money as a business from that, because you have a consumer base of literally millions of people if you develop it right. So looking to scale up and scale deep when you go into these communities. So rising incomes is good news for business, because there's an incredible untapped market there that can really support a business through economic fluctuations. Africa is industrializing. Nearly 600 million Africans. I'm sorry, that's my next slide. It's industrializing. It's industrializing a lot in manufacturing, but also in non-smokestack industries like agribusiness. Talk a little bit about agribusiness in a minute. And then 3, closing the infrastructure gap. Again, 600 million Africans lack access to electricity. This is such an important part of lifting people out of poverty. We hear India talking about this all the time. We need to get people out of poverty. And the way we do that in part is we need to electrify the continent, which brings us to energy production. So I do not love the fact that Africa has vast oil and gas reserves. I wish they didn't exist. I'm incredibly concerned. I believe that we have lost 1.5 Celsius as a goal. I think we're past it. And we can see the extreme weather and other and heat and other effects of that. I mean, there's a Category 5 storm out in the Atlantic right now headed towards the Caribbean. And this is happening more and more often, these strong storms, as you well know. But I'll take natural gas over oil any day. It has less of an impact on the climate, and better yet, renewables. The world is racing ahead with enormous investments in renewable energy. For the first time this year, plowing more money into solar than into oil. And the continent has abundant land and sun for solar installations. And I'm going to talk about the risks of not investing in renewable energy. The trick, if you're going to go in and invest in energy production, is to avoid being part of the resource curse, where Western companies come in, they ignore lax environmental laws, often with the collusion of a corrupt government, extract resources, and leave behind poverty and environmental degradation while contributing to the destruction of our planet, our global commons. So human rights issues always to consider when going in and talking about energy in any location. And then I love this, increasing digital and mobile access. So Africa has more than 120 million active mobile money accounts. This is about 50% of the global total. This has leapfrogged over traditional banking products. So I know that I was just in my branch bank last week, had to drive there to do some business. There are platforms now that are helping African people with mobile phones to access all the services of the bank, a lot less complicated than what we generally go through here in the United States. And this trend is going to help companies improve productivity, speed up transactions, give you access to wider markets, because as this picture shows, people in rural communities have phones and they are using them to improve their lives and improve their businesses. This could add 300 billion something to the continent's GDP before the end of this decade. So here's some examples. This is M-Pesa. M-Pesa offers a bank account, and you can see on the right side of the screen, that's connected to your SIM card. So it's governed from your phone. And you use a PIN to receive secure text messages. You can pay in shops. You can send money instantly. You can pay bills. You can withdraw from your account. You can save. You can even take out small loans. No credit card, no laptop, no smartphone. Any phone will do. And most of this is done from over 80,000 physical agents, anywhere from the tuck shops, like the guy on the upper left-hand side, to more sophisticated locations in the larger cities. And you can find these along the side of the road. But look how easy it is for an M-Pesa customer to start a savings account, as opposed to when we want to start a savings account and go in and sign documents in a bank. Another that I think is a good example of how mobile apps have improved the lives of Africans and created really great business opportunities and allowed companies to start developing products and trust relationships with consumers is in agribusiness. So iCow is targeted at smallholder farmers. It provides weather data, market prices, and advice and training on different agricultural issues. So it can help farmers deal with the impacts of changing weather patterns due to climate. This app is out of Kenya. It's not just about cows. They also have chicken services, but among the benefits that it provides, it helps farmers better manage the estrus cycles of their cows. And it also gives them improved animal health because they have access to veterinarians through this platform. So mobilization and digitization is a really cool trend. Supply chain. So we all saw what happened with supply chain, particularly out of China during COVID. Obviously, the global economy shut down for a few months, but it took a long time for China to open up and be able to meet supply chain needs in the West. The result of this is we've seen a lot of reshoring, bringing some of that manufacturing back to the United States, back to the EU to avoid these sorts of problems. But Africa is primed to be a supply chain source. Africa has most of what we need for green tech and for other products. And so if we do the mining there of minerals and metals, and then we create the products also in the African continent, we are shortening and simplifying supply chain. That also accelerates decarbonization. There are challenges, obviously. I've already talked about some of them. I don't think that they're barriers, but let's work through a few. I talked about developing local relationships and talent. I want to emphasize it both as an opportunity and a challenge. I think it's so important. There's one thing I have learned in my years of working with friends and business partners in South Africa, and that is that you have to build trust. You have to build trust. And I think a way you build trust is by not just bringing your people in from outside to start up your business or to run your business, but developing people that are local and trusting them to run your business and to give you better insight and access into communities. Infrastructure. So last mile. A lot of very poor communities, but again, poor people have money to spend, and your products and services, business products and services, may improve their lives. You want to get those products there, but that last mile can be a challenge. Here is a company that has done something cool. This is Jibu. Jibu is present in Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, which is, by the way, the poorest country on the planet, according to some measures. Lack of access to clean drinking water is a huge problem all around the globe. Jibu is a franchise. You can see pictures of some of the franchisees from their website on the right-hand side. So they train, micro-franchise is another really great opportunity in marketplaces at the base of the pyramid. But Jibu provides a water processing and filtration equipment. A lot of it is solar powered. They can have standalone stores where people can come and pick up this clean bottled water. But they also have delivery people like the gentleman on the left who will deliver this out to townships, out to more rural areas so that people have access to clean drinking water. In some poor communities, women may spend as much as 8 hours of their day walking to get water each day for their families, for their cooking and their washing. And when women are spending the day walking, or children spending the day walking to get water, what they're not doing is participating in the market, and they're not going to school. So anything that we can do to improve access to water, but also just covering that last mile, getting products to people. Delayed payment is a bit of an issue. Sometimes that interest rate, I'm sorry, what do I want to say? The conversion rates for currencies. Companies in Africa may wait, sometimes for a couple of weeks, to wait and see what's going to come from that conversion rate, whether it's going to get better. And so there can be some delay in payment, but again, patience, understanding that that's not someone trying not to pay you. They're just trying to find the most favorable rate. Joint currencies, even for regions of Africa, would likely help a great deal with this. And distrust of new technologies. A friend of mine who was with the University of Pretoria, Gordon Institute for Business Science, Tosh Ishmael, who's now in Canada doing some good work. But Tosh talked about the fact that there's a headache powder that gets sold in the tuck shops in South Africa, in the informal settlements that surround Johannesburg and Cape Town in particular. So it's grandpa's headache powder. Now, other companies have come in with products that may be more effective or at a lower price point. but the consumers trust grandpas because it's been around for years. They are familiar with the ads. By the way, you can use those mobile phones to do all kinds of advertising of goods and services, to do a lot of education. Soap operas are very, very popular. And so sometimes they use actors in these little mini soaps that you can get and watch on your phone to teach business skills and to do advertising of products, et cetera. But grandpa's built trust with communities, and so it has been very hard for other manufacturers of these headache powders, of aspirin, right, to penetrate these markets. So let me talk about climate. If the pattern of clean energy investment doesn't change, by mid-century, more than 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions could come from least developed countries. Least developed countries. Where are they coming from now? The United States is the biggest producer of emissions. Russia, China, and the EU are all right up there with us, Canada too. But we've really got to reduce these emissions, and we've got to have more urgency, or as we call it in the international climate world, we have to have more ambition. A problem that Africa has in developing its renewable energy potential is the cost of capital. Philanthropic loans are being made at 15% plus of interest. There is a lack of what we call concessional finance or low interest finance. There's a lot of talk at COP21 in Glasgow, at COP22 last year, and I'm sure we're going to hear it at the upcoming COP in Dubai in November, December of this year, about the need for reform of the development banks, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. They need to change the way they're lending money. We also need to see a lot more grant money going into least developed economies, low-income economies, to help them mitigate by developing renewable energy, transition away from coal and oil and other fossil fuels, and to adapt to the impacts they're already seeing from climate. There are, as I mentioned, oil and gas reserves, and we are seeing some very concerning market greed right now. Oil majors who had made lots of noise about their move towards renewable energy are publicly backpedaling from those commitments as fast as they can. Russia's war on Ukraine changed the marketplace for them. And we see Saudi Arabia participating in this as well, but oil and gas prices are going up. Investors are investing in it. And so we are seeing an increase in the desire to explore for and produce petroleum products. And we need to reverse that. I mean, the COP is in an oil producing country this year, and the presidency of the COP is held by a gentleman who is also CEO of the UAE's largest petroleum company. So bad signs. We also have the debate of the right to develop. So, you know, India and Africa and other least developed countries are saying to the United States and the EU, you achieved development by burning fossil fuels for the last 150 years. And you tell us not to burn fossil fuels. You tell us in India, in China, where we have huge coal reserves, don't burn coal. That's not fair. We need to develop. We need to lift people out of poverty. We have a right to develop. It's not that these countries don't have engaged climate negotiators, but you can see the tension there. What needs to happen is for this finance I spoke about to help these countries leapfrog over fossil fuels as the engine of industrialization, as the engine of their economies. And we can do this in Africa because it has the potential to be a solar powerhouse. There was the Africa Climate Week ended on Wednesday. It was the first one. It was held in Nairobi. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said an injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities here in Africa. He is talking about the impacts of extreme heat, the risk of desertification, and the impact that it'll have on agribusiness. But there is some good news. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says African nations are currently paying 4 times as much for their state borrowing as the US and 8 times as much as the EU. President Biden says he wants to send 11 billion. That would be great, but he only got $1 billion out of our Congress. No surprise, because we politicized this scientific issue. So we need to send money. We need infrastructure investment so that these places can electrify, raise people out of poverty. Supply chain finance for small and medium-sized enterprises. There's all kinds of good work going on in the renewable space with SMEs. We need regulatory changes to make sure that credit risk is being put through a vigorous due diligence process. And we absolutely have to have developed nations, the OECD nations, meet a 2009 pledge they made at COP15 in Copenhagen to provide $1 billion in climate finance a year. We haven't met it yet. The anger was, it wasn't just palpable. People were shouting in anger at the COP in Glasgow in 2021. The tone was a little different. It was a bit tamped down given the host country in Sharm el-Sheikh, but we're going to continue to hear it. Developing nations are asking for climate finance. But at the climate summit, the New York Times walked away with this particular quote. I will let you read it for yourselves. Africa is a continent that has so much to offer us. The people are warm and welcoming and want to lift their countries into a better place, to improve education, to improve the status of women. And I think there are a lot of positive signs there that should make us feel like Africa is a good place to do business in the years to come. And with that, I will close and I'll stop sharing my screen.